What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Thanks for coming back for another episode of AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. I'm Larry Rifkin. Along for another ride into the land of the taboo is John Kropsic, our engineer and co-host extraordinaire. And John, we love to tackle topics that nobody else wants to talk about.
Yeah, the taboo. What are we talking about today?
Why do we talk about things that nobody else wants to talk about? Because we want people to listen to things that nobody else will talk about.
Right.
But if they were that interesting, I guess other people would talk about them.
Here, you're out of control again.
I don't know what we're doing. But, John, seriously, we are going to be talking about something today that few people dare let pass their lips. And that's the issue of death. Did I say death?
Yeah, this is a very strange one.
Haven't they all been? No?
This one is different.
John, you and I, when we sat down and we had our pre-production meetings about putting together America Trends podcast, we said nothing's going to be off limits.
That's true.
And we're going to tackle things that others may not. We're going to look a little bit into the future. We're going to see where things are trending. And we noticed that there were these things called death cafes.
Yeah.
And what did you say? Coffee and a little rigor mortis to set in? What did you say?
I said, well, that sounds pretty strange.
That's what you said. But that did not deter me. I decided we were still going to do this. But it seems like there's this growing level of honesty when it comes to death.
Okay.
There is.
We're all going to get there someday. I mean,
let me give you an example of a trend in our society. And we love talking about this. This is what we're all about here. And it's called the honest obit, not one that sugarcoats the real you. Now, my question is, do you want somebody to write that honest obit that says, you know, he was really an angry old man. I don't care what you say about him. And maybe he did give to charity. Maybe he did this. But really, down deep, he was pretty nasty. Do you want anybody to read that about you?
The honest obit.
Yeah, the honest obit.
Is this a cafe, too?
No, well, this is going on. People are writing more honest obituaries.
Wow. I've heard of writing your own obituary.
Well, that's another trend.
Right.
And you and I talked to a gentleman.
We did.
Who actually gives a course. And the really poignant part of that was he was a former journalist, and he would have people come so that they could tell their story.
Right.
That the obituary was their memoir because nobody else was going to write about their lives because it was considered common.
Now, that makes sense, but the honest obit.
Wait a minute. So you're saying that you want somebody to put a real editor's touch, take that out. That tells them too much information. Well, no, but this guy, what was so poignant about it, the guy who was holding this class, was the fact that he himself had stage 4 cancer, and yet he was helping others to get ready to write their story. And, of course, he had written his. Well, I don't know. Well, do you plan to do any of that? I mean, do you plan to leave a lot of your legacy, not to chance, but you've really buttoned everything up? What do you plan to do?
Well, I want to have my affairs in order. Let's face it, but I hadn't thought about the obituary part of it.
You were going to write down all the affairs you've had and put them in order?
Put them in order.
Wow, John, now that's a task. Wow. No, Marilyn, really, it's not. He hasn't had any. But you think about it in regards to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, death. Surprise, as it is, there are so many of us as baby boomers who really don't even want to imagine that the antidote to what it is that we're here doing is death. We don't even want to consider it. We've been very reluctant to talk about it, and we figure there's going to come up. They are going to come up with a pill or something that helps us to avoid the inevitable. But it's not, because many of our own fellows, in fact, I lost 3 friends last year at my age. So you know that there's an inevitability that we haven't gotten to perpetual life yet. But do you want to talk about it with others? Because these death cafes have sprung up here in the United States, and I think they started in Europe. And the idea is that we really do want to talk about our fears, our anxieties, and or maybe our imaginings about what's just over yonder.
Just beyond the horizon.
Yes. Oh, now you're taking our own slug line and you're applying it in an inappropriate way, John. Now, I know that we're supposed to have done a lot of planning about death so as not to leave our families with a lot of loose ends. So we get to the wills and the living trusts and the advance directives. But even at that, very few people have done all that they need to do.
Oh, absolutely, because you never know when it's going to happen. So you're absolutely right.
Now, how much of that have you tended to? You have a will?
I've done some, yes. We have a will, yeah.
You have a living trust or no?
No.
Okay. What about advance directives about health?
Yeah, that we have. Yep.
That you have, okay. Yep. I remember, though, a lawyer telling me at one time, very interesting guy from Canada, you would not believe the fights that go on when people are starting to fight over your stuff. And he told me this incredible story about a family, and it was an uncle, I believe, and they would all come over to his house. He had no children. And they would literally put stickies underneath various things that they wanted, a table, a chair, an heirloom, something that they thought was really special and that they would like in their home. And just to confound them, this guy was pretty clever because he would find these. And he would take them off, and he would rearrange them. So Joe thought he was getting that, but he put Joe out, and he got something that was broken or whatever. Go on, yeah.
Now, personally, I think the theory I have is I want to give it away before I get to that point.
All right, hopefully. So you want all the toys
I'm going to give the stuff, what the kids want and stuff, yeah. I want to, at some point.
Yeah, but how far along are you? I mean, God forbid, if something happened tomorrow.
Well,
what a mess.
Then all bets are off.
I know, we're all leaving a mess to our kids. And then really, when you think about it, at the end of the process, unfortunately, your ancestors' lives end up in a box in your basement.
Right.
If you can find it. I know, I hate to say that. And I don't know if I would say that at a death cafe. Because they'd all look at me saying, who's this guy?
Well, we should find out more about these death cafes.
You think so? Yeah, I mean, this is a trend. We have some going on in our state where we're broadcasting from. Death cafes, cookies, coffees, and the great beyond. And we found a gentleman who wants to talk with us about this. But first, let's take a listen, because there are some death cafes that have been recorded. They're online. This one from the Voice of America. Let's take a quick listen to what people say.
Death in America has never been as intimate or pervasive as during the Civil War. But in the century and a half since, it has virtually disappeared from daily life and discourse.
For many reasons, our society and many of us have bought into the truth that a conversation about death is about as impolite as sexual dysfunction.
During a so-called death discussion at this church in Columbia, Maryland, there was a need to talk about it.
I realized I'd like to have control over my own death.
I resisted at first coming to this, but I finally decided in favor of it because I feel that it could be a benefit to me, even though I can't identify what that benefit is yet.
I would like to be more accepting of whatever happens.
There is a feeling here that so much of what people do in life falls far short of preparing them for death, and at the same time a hope that talking about it will.
You're there in one moment, and then in the next moment you're gone.
Author Pat Cochran Engelbach organized the meeting.
And I think for this culture especially, we have such distancers between ourselves and death. We're too successful, we're too good looking, we have too many toys. These are all distances between ourselves and the earth.
This is a poplar casket here.
Caleb Wild is a sixth-generation funeral director in Pennsylvania. His profession emerged after the carnage of the Civil War, and he criticizes it for removing death from the home.
I think the funeral industry has been responsible for the American death denial. We have taken the responsibilities away from the community, from families, and we've been paid to be the shield from the reality of death.
I'm Pinky, and I would like some pointers as to how I can go out saying bye-bye.
Ruth Ann Seltniks is here because she has terminal cancer.
You start dying from the moment you are born. And some people die earlier, some people die later. I'm 72 years old. Good Lord, how long do I need to,
If the taboo of talking about death can be broken over coffee and cake, the thinking goes, then it may become a bit less terrifying to face this final moment. Jerome Sokolovsky, VOA News, Columbia, Maryland.
By the way, John, that was really interesting what people had to say, and that's what a Death Cafe is all about. With us to discuss the Death Cafe movement is a man by the name of Bill Palmer, who runs the Death Cafe franchise, if you will, in Oakland, California. Hi, Bill. How did you get involved?
I first came upon Death Cafe as a hospice volunteer. At the time, I was living in Florida, and my mom was a hospice patient and just received really phenomenal care in the hospice that she was in. And along the way there, I heard of Death Cafe and decided that, I wanted to try to give something back in terms of the good service that my family and my mother received. So I moved to Oakland, not having anything to do with Death Cafe. But when I got here in Oakland, I founded Death Cafe in 2013. It appealed to me because I'd always felt that even as a kid, I would go to funerals, and I was sort of surprised at how polite and pleasant and nice everybody was. And I thought, well, why can't people be like that all the time? So it's always kind of fascinated me, and it's just a form of community service for me, a way to give something back to the community that I think is valuable.
Is it better to describe what a Death Cafe is not? It's not a grief counseling service. Explain what it is not, or what people might think it is.
Well, what it is not, it's not grief counseling, although people who are grieving do attend. And they're welcome to talk about their grief. And the reason it's not grief counseling is that I offer no ongoing support. And usually grief counseling involves that. So to say what it is, it's a free, open, welcoming environment in which people can talk about any aspect of death that they want. So it ranges from, concerns about the administrative aspects of death, wills, advanced care directives, do not resuscitate orders, durable powers of attorney, all the way over to, people's deepest wonderings and musings and philosophical and religious questions and ideas about death, and pretty much everything in between. What I will say, in addition, about Death Cafe is there's no agenda other than what the people want to bring up. And the ones that I lead, there's no arguing and there's no debating allowed. So what I tell my participants is you can hear something you don't like or you don't agree with, you can ask for clarification or you can ask for explanation. But there's no point in arguing different points of view. It's not the right place to do it because it can shut people down. And that seems to work pretty well. So people come in and express, all kinds of different kinds of views, and there's usually a healthy exchange, especially when there is maybe a difference of opinion or someone from one religious group, may not actually believe something that someone from another religious group is saying.
Does the subject get around to something that commonly is discussed that we might not imagine people want to talk about? Is there one thing that it always gravitates back to about the fear of death or something of that nature, or no? Is it pretty freewheeling?
Well, it's pretty freewheeling, but I'd say if there's a common theme, it's not that people are afraid of being dead. They're afraid of the approach. They're afraid of the exit ramp. So for some people, as they look upon the idea of death or as they have experienced it in others, they see a progressive loss of mobility, a progressive loss of capability, perhaps a progressive loss of cognition. They lose, things they enjoy, and that's if there was one theme, I'd have to say that's kind of a cross-cultural, cross-gender, cross-ethnic kind of fear. But you're right. I mean, it's a freewheeling conversation. There's just a rich, infinite variety of things that people bring up, some of which are kind of surprising.
What surprised you the most in a conversation, or something that stays with you?
Well, a lot of things. One thing that stood out for me was the couple that said that after every funeral they attended, they went home and made mad, passionate love. And that just stopped the conversation in its tracks. And I said, well, tell me more. And they said, well, it was their affirmation of life. So that was, and it was done with humor, and I guess it's true. So that has stood out for me. The other thing that's really stood out for me is how we die is almost exclusively a function of wealth and race and class, and the concerns of different communities are very different based on who they are, what their experience has been. So for me personally, there's a political aspect to it. I'm Caucasian. I don't realistically worry that my grandchildren will be attacked by the police on their way to or from school. But for other people in other communities, it's a very real fear. And so we come to that quite a bit.
That's very interesting. I want to get back to the exit ramp and whether people are saying in general in your Death Cafe that they'd like to have a lot more control. And there's a big debate, of course, about suicide and legally allowed. Is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, it frequently is. And here in Oakland, we've done 63 Death Cafes, and I won't say that it's unanimous, but overwhelmingly, probably 90% of the people who come to Death Cafe, and this may be some example of self-selection as well, overwhelmingly favor what is now the law in California about, end-of-life assistance. The advocates of it don't like to use the word suicide, but that's what it is. The law here in California is almost identical to the law in Oregon. Mm-hmm. Even the people who say, well, I'm in favor of the law, say, well, I might not do it, but I would like to have the choice. So, again, this may be people who self-select. I think the people who maybe for religious, moral, political, whatever grounds would be against it might not be the kind of folks that would come to Death Cafe. But it passed the California legislature, signed by a Roman Catholic, Jesuit-trained governor, Jerry Brown.
Yes.
So it has genuine, widespread support.
I was watching some videos of Death Cafes online. A lot of younger people were attending. I was surprised.
Yeah, here in Oak, our demographic skews to female and it skews to older. Not overwhelmingly, but substantially. But we do have young people who show up. I would define young people, 35 or younger. And frequently what's happened is that, they've experienced a death, or for that generation, there's been a lot of death due to drug use or abuse or overuse. And suicide as well. So rarely, once in a while, you get somebody 22, 23, 24 years old, and they come in and they say, well, I want to be a funeral director or something like that. So, over time, we've attracted more and more younger folks, which is a good thing.
Is the Death Cafe concept here in the United States a growing one in response to perhaps the fact that we have sanitized and outsourced death in many ways, and even funeral parlor directors will acknowledge that the way we do it today is very different than the way we did it, and our intimacy in the home setting with death was something where everyone was accustomed to it at one point in time.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I think underneath all that is the taboo that's maybe getting knocked down a little bit, but, the taboo that we have culturally here in the U.S. and in other places as well. We just don't talk about it. There are whole websites designed to there's something called the Conversation Project, which is a website devoted to offering people help in how to begin the conversation with a spouse, with a parent, with a child about death. And a continuing theme in the death cafes that I've led is people that just, grandpa just doesn't want to talk about it. And, that's disturbing. The people who die without a will, people who get sick and are ailing and haven't made their wishes clear, end up in some just horrible situations. But there is a movement, at least here in California, and I think there's been something like 4,600 death cafes around the world since it was started in 2011 for dying at home. There's a concept called a good death, which sounds like an oxymoron to some people, but it reduced down to its most simple terms is, how do I want to die? What do I want? What do I not want? And there's a lot of ways you can legally make sure that you get what you want. But if you don't have an advanced care directive, if you haven't talked to those who might be around you as you're dying, and no one knows what you want, you're going to get the full treatment in a hospital because the hospital can't do anything else if they don't know what you want. They have to go to extreme measures to keep you alive, and that's actually probably good public policy. But if people make their wishes known, the chances are greater that, they'll receive palliative care. Sometimes it's a fight with doctors to let someone die. Mm-hmm. Many doctors will confess privately that they view the death of their patient as their personal failure, when in fact all it is the death of the patient. I guess there's malpractice and doctors who make mistakes like we all do. Mm-hmm. But some of it is the superpowered doctor who thinks he or she can cure everyone. Well, that's obviously not true. So, there's very, very much a movement to humanize death and to where possible and where desirable, to take it out of institutions and to not hide it away. If you read the accounts of how people died, even 50 or 75 years ago or 100 years ago, most people died at home. Mm-hmm. Their families or relatives or friends tended to their body. And yes, there were funeral homes and undertakers and all the rest, but it wasn't nearly so sanitized as it is in many cases now.
I know that a death cafe, by virtue of your core principles and the like, is a freewheeling, as we discussed, open exchange, no agenda, objectives, or themes. But do you ever find that there are so many people who come to you and they just have some questions about advance directives, wills, trusts, that you decide that maybe you need to bring in somebody with that expertise rather than a group of lay people talking about it? Or do you just encourage them to go out and find more information?
We don't do that. There are death salons and death meetings and death over dinner where because of what they want to do, they'll bring in attorneys, they'll bring in a minister or a rabbi or an imam, or they'll bring in an accountant, to talk about these things and to potentially offer services. What we do in Death Cafe Oakland is share what knowledge is in the room, and I'm very comfortable to say to somebody, if you Google the term advanced care directive, you'll come up with hundreds of resources of advanced care directives, and you simply need to get it notarized and scanned into your medical records. So I'll direct people to resources that I know and trust, but we don't advocate a particular program, policy, philosophy.
No, I understand. Are there changes in the movement? I mean, it came over in 2011 from Europe. Are there things that have evolved or changed in the thinking or the core philosophy, or does it remain the same?
I think the core ideas really remain the same because they're well thought out and they're very logical. John Underwood is the name of the guy who started Death Cafe in England in 2011, as you say. And I think what Death Cafe has done, it's kind of been the tip of the arrow to inspire all other kinds of discussions and services that we just alluded to, where they bring in speakers and they advocate a particular point of view, which is great. We don't do that. But I think Death Cafe in the U.S. and around the world has inspired a lot of that. There are people making and I don't begrudge them, writing books about death. And, my life as a funeral director. And there's a great book called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by a woman named Caitlin Doty, who writes, surprisingly enough, with a great deal of humor about her experience as a funeral director. And that's all wonderful. That's people expressing their views about death and bringing it out into the open, where, as you've said, it's really kind of been hidden in some ways.
Absolutely. You talked about wealth, race, and class, and I had never really considered this, but does someone perhaps come to a death cafe with an experience about death that is totally outside the normal realm? People want to come and talk about the experience with their mother who held on a little bit longer than they thought, and the caregiving, or someone with Alzheimer's or whatever it might have been, and yet someone else comes in and talks about a gruesome end for a 15-year-old boy. How much does that change the conversation?
Well, it certainly changes the conversation. I mean, we've had people come in who have lost children, who have small children who have died. We've had several women come in and talk about their miscarriages, and that's a completely taboo subject in many respects. And so the groups, almost all of which, they're pretty sensitive, compassionate people, that will stop a group in its tracks. And, as the leader of the group, and I've led lots of other different kinds of groups, I'll just let there be some silence for a few minutes and let it sink into people of what's being heard. Almost unanimously, the response from the group is compassion. What can we do to support you? What are you doing to support yourself? And just listening and being there. I'm sure you've been to a funeral or two in your time, and you may have noticed that some of the phenomenally stupid things that people say. He's in a better place. And,
none of us really knows what to say. Even filling out sympathy cards can be so difficult.
Right. Well, I think the key to untying that knot is that you don't really need to say anything. You just need to be there. So typically people say, oh, what can I do? Your husband died, your wife died, your kid died. What can I do? And that's just laying another burden on the person who's grieving. So I think the better thing to do is to simply say in your own words, I'm there for you. I'd like to do X. I'd like to send you a food basket. I'd like to send you a bottle of wine. I'd like to send you flowers, or I'd like to take you to the movies. And the person say, no, I don't really feel like any of that, but thank you. And if you're physically present with somebody, a touch, assuming it's appropriate, is a whole lot more powerful and effective than some mindless platitude.
Do you have a lot of people who come to the Death Cafe who themselves are very close to the end? They are involved with a program, perhaps toward the end, the palliative care? Or is this generally pretty healthy people at the moment, but they do see that they're pretty far down the road? I mean, who normally attends?
Normally, it's people who for whom death is not imminent. But that's the vast majority of the folks who come to Death Cafe Oakland. But there is a significant percentage. I have one gentleman, older guy, well into his 90s, and he seems to be perfectly healthy and fit. But he knows statistically that he doesn't have much further to go. And there's several older folks, well into their 80s or early 90s. Who, at least to my knowledge, are not in the active process of dying, but who are close. They know that that their death is near, and most of them actually kind of have a fatal, sort of fatalistic attitude about it, and just want to hear. I think they want to hear some support, for them, and they get it. And I also think they want to pass on some of the wisdom that they have. When you're laying on your deathbed and you're looking up at whatever you're looking up at, you're probably not going to say, gee, I wish I spent more time at the office.
Absolutely. Do you have any fire starters where if the conversation is not really getting off to a rousing start and people are having a hard time, because, as you say, this is a topic that we rarely approach, do you have any way to break the silence? Is there a common thread that you bring to this?
Well, in my own personal professional life, I lead lots of different kinds of groups in a business setting, and if there's prolonged silence and there's business at hand, I will I will ask a question to lead the group to what the intended output is. But at Death Cafe, I will just let people sit and stew in their silence. And you have to be patient, and you can't, as a leader of the group, I don't want to rescue the group. I don't want to do their work for them. So if what they need to do is sit there for what seems like an eternity, and in fact it's only maybe about 60 seconds in silence, I'll just let them do that. Never has a group just said, in effect, we have nothing to say. And there's always somebody, they can't stand the silence anymore. So, they'll say something, and then it's pretty much off to the races.
Well, if somebody sees a Death Cafe in their community and they've listened to this and now they're more prepared to understand what may occur there, what should they do in preparation for going to one?
Well, I think they should go on the www.deathcafe.com website and read about it. And I think they should be prepared to say just a little bit about why they came. I'll ask people, why did you come? And they say, well, I'm interested in death, or I thought it was weird, so I thought I would come and check it out. So I don't think there's a whole lot of preparation that people need to do. But I think that if they have something in their mind that is most important to them, that they should ask about it or talk about it. So that, again, could be, the administrative side of death, the business side of it, or it could be, I had a lot of people in my groups who had someone close to them die 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they're still grieving, in a way that interferes with what they need to do every day. So, the topics are really open. I don't do icebreakers or
right, I understand. What about couples coming? Because we may view, just as we view finances and where we're going to live, how we're going to raise a family, I would think that people have different views of death.
Yeah, we've had any number of couples who come in and who have talked about, for example, I remember one couple where, and I can't remember who was Jewish and who was Catholic, but it was a married couple, and, their views on death and their religious proscripts for death are very, very different. And it was fascinating to hear them talk about how they resolved and, decided what they were going to do or how they were going to plan. And basically what they decided was that the Catholic person would follow Catholic ritual and the Jewish person would follow Jewish ritual. But a lot of times it gets into argument, conflict, and there's not a lot that we can do at Death Cafe about that.
I understand that they're growing across the country. If somebody would like to conduct one, Bill, tell us again how they could get involved, or whether you can basically take the principles and run one and call it a Death Cafe. Explain what the limits are in starting one.
If someone's interested in starting a Death Cafe and using that name, the best thing to do is to go on the website, www.deathcafe.com, read all about it, sign up, log in, it doesn't cost anything, and run the Death Cafe in your local community, neighborhood, wherever, according to those guidelines. There's nothing to stop anybody from calling it Death Talk or Death Over Dinner or, whatever, if they want to do something different. But it's really it's actually pretty simple. The administrative end of it is very simple, and if you do start a Death Cafe on that website, it gets listed globally. People who are looking for a Death Cafe can search, based on geography, and sign up to attend.
Are they normally held in a cafe, a coffee house, or in people's homes? Where are they generally conducted?
In a variety of places. Here in Oakland, there's something called Chapel of the Chimes, which is a non-sectarian cemetery, funeral home, et cetera, and they've been great sponsors of ours for years. But sometimes they're held in cafes, sometimes they're held in people's homes. There's really no restriction on that. It's strongly suggested there be, in England they say tea and cakes. Here we say coffee and rolls or donuts or something like that. There's never all the death cafes that I've lit are free. Sometimes there's a small charge, so $2, $5, $7, $10. But what you agree to do as an official death cafe facilitator is to only charge fees to cover, say, room rental expenses or to defray the cost of the coffee or refreshments or whatever. So, yeah, they can pretty much be held anywhere.
All right. Well, very, very interesting conversation. Bill Palmer joining us today on America Trends Podcast, talking about a trend, that being Death Cafe here in the United States. And, Bill, we thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Larry. I enjoyed it.
If you like this episode, please leave us a kind rating or review. I'm on my hands and knees. Please do it on iTunes, because your review is really critical for us to continue providing this podcast. And John, I know that iTunes looks at this. They want to make certain that we have some rankings, some visibility, and that we're getting some traffic, and then they give you better positioning.
Absolutely. And this way it'll put us in the forefront so you can find us much easier on your iPhone or Android, whatever you may be using.
And they may even send you out an alert. So please, if you can, don't miss a single episode of America Trends Podcast. And, John, they can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher.com.
And also subscribe on our website.
Oh, absolutely.
We send out a little blurb, and we can also take your emails there at newsletter@rifkinradio.com. That's another way to get us.
And we do not sell or share
our
lists.
No spamming, nothing.
Well, I don't know. Does anybody want our lists? I don't know, but we don't do it.
Good question.
Even if they asked us.
Even
Nobody's
if they
asked us. But.
Right.
And when you do subscribe, let us know on Facebook and Twitter. We're getting very active on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both platforms, and John, this is really easy, @Trends Podcast. That's it.
That's real easy.
You like that? Did you get that?
I got that.
Okay.
I'm going to have to check it out now. I'm going to have to twit it.
We want to thank you, of course, personally for subscribing. And we also would like to get some of your ideas and questions for future episodes of America Trends Podcast. And that's important, too, because we're all over the map. Our interest editorially in the future, John, has no bounds. But we want to know what it is that you'd like to hear from us. If there was a segment that you'd like to see us follow up on, or if there's something in depth that you'd like us to deal with, please let us know that, too.
We're looking at the future. There's so much we can look at.
Yeah, and the topics that we've dealt with, I mean, we have gotten such incredible guests over the recent period, but they're only going to come to us if they know we've got an engaged and interactive audience.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that you become part of this podcast in so many different ways that we're sharing with you today.
You're absolutely right. We need your support and your help and your reviews.
And your ideas.
And ideas.
Or questions on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, you can direct message us @Trends Podcast or using the hashtag Trends Podcast. You can also add an email address if you have a public one that you'd like us to give out.
Yeah, good. And you know what? We didn't mention Amazon.
Oh, yes. We have an Amazon store.
Yes.
And so if you go up, you don't have to buy the things that might be highlighted at that particular time. You can buy any book, and there's some benefit that comes back to us.
Just put what you're looking at in the little search engine block there, and it'll take you right to Amazon, and it'll help us out.
Absolutely. And it doesn't really cost you anything more because they have built that into their pricing structure. So we get a little taste and you get more programming like this and you get the item that you were looking for. So it works for all of us.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely. Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
So for more information on America Trends and for the latest updates on upcoming episodes, be sure to like our page on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Trends Podcast. And again, you can find John and I here in our studio performing as best we can for you.
That's right. Let us out.
What's that? They're not going to let us out. No one is. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on America Trends. We'll see you next time.
We hope to hear from you soon.
Oh, by the way, we are posting all the time. And we're posting on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Good point.
So just be aware, if you're looking for new episodes, they're coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When you wake up, before you go out on your jog or your walk and you want to take us with you, we'll be there for you.
Very good.
All right. Have a great day.